Paranormal M takes you where reason fails. From haunted houses to eerie objects, the stories linger. Subscribe and enter the unknown with us. Hey, it's me, the Ghost Friend. I've experienced my fair share of odd, possibly paranormal events in life. This one is probably the earliest one. Even though the title might sound a little silly, I've always called the ghost I saw that day Oliver Oakley. You'll see why soon enough. From what I remember, he wasn't menacing, just unexpected, and here's the story of Oliver Oakley. When I was a kid, I grew up in a very religious household. We were Jehovah's Witnesses. I've since moved on from that. Good for you. Part of our regular ministry involved what we called return visits. If someone agreed to talk again after an initial conversation, we'd come back the next week at the same time. My mom had a return visit named Marjorie, a sweet elderly woman who lived alone in an old house somewhere in upstate New York. That's funny. I loved going with my mom to visit her because Marjorie ran a little side hustle selling old books. She always had boxes and boxes stacked on her front porch. And best of all, she kept a stash of my childhood favorite, the Goosebumps series. Every visit meant a new book for me. The celery stalks at midnight. The visit started like usual. We climbed the uneven front steps, pushed open the squeaky screen door, and stepped onto the enclosed porch. The air smelled faintly of old paper and pine. Boxes of books were scattered everywhere like a miniature library in chaos. Mom knocked on the inner door, and a minute later, Marjorie shuffled out wearing her usual cardigan and nasal cannula. Cannula? The oxygen tube trailing back into the house. She greeted us with a smile, and then she said something that gave me the chills even before anything weird happened. "Hope you don't mind if we have company today. Oliver's here." I glanced around, expecting to see someone else, but there was no one, just the three of us. Confused, I asked, "Who's Oliver?" Marjorie gave me the kind of look grandmothers give when they're about to tell a story. "Well," she said, "you know how in your scary books there are sometimes ghosts?" I nodded slowly. "Oliver's like that. He's a ghost." Mom immediately tried to change the subject. Marjorie, however, was delighted to explain. Oliver, she said, had lived there over 100 years ago. He wasn't famous or anything, just a wandering man who loved oak trees. Supposedly traveled across the country planting them. Then she pointed toward the side of the porch. And sure enough, I saw a huge oak tree I'd somehow never noticed before. "He planted that one himself," she said. "Every autumn he comes back to check on it." I found this weirdly fascinating. Mom, however, steered the conversation back toward Bible verses. And that's when it happened. The inside door had suddenly slammed shut with such force that it made us both jump. The oxygen tube under the door got sharply bent, and for a second, I thought Marjorie would panic. She didn't even flinch. "Oh, that's just Oliver," she said casually. "He likes to listen in." Mom whispered to me, "It's just the wind." And even at 7 years old, I knew that was nonsense. It was a calm autumn day, no breeze, no draft, and the slam had come from inside. While Mom and Marjorie kept talking, I wandered toward the book boxes. As I flipped through a book about robots, I suddenly heard slow, deliberate footsteps circling me on the porch. The sound was so clear I could feel the boards beneath me creaking. There's no one there, though. I froze, then quietly tiptoed back to my mom. and as I stood beside her, I glanced through the mesh at the porch toward the living room window, and that's when I saw him. A tall, shadowy figure stood inside the house. He wasn't blurry like some vague shadow. You could make out the outline of a long coat, a hat with a wide brim, and a sharp jaw. He wasn't moving, just watching. I told Mom later, but of course she didn't believe me. We left with the Goosebumps book in hand, and life went on. But sometimes, when autumn rolls around and the air gets cold and still, Mom and I bring up Oliver Oakley and laugh about how weird that day was. I never felt any danger from him, just like a quiet kind of pride, like a gardener checking on his favorite tree. Oh, and if anybody ever digs up an Oliver who planted oak trees around upstate New York in the 1900s, let me know. And to that one person who told me to look up mullion, it does kind of help. Thank you. Whispers in the kitchen. I come to y'all for some guidance, because honestly, I've never experienced anything like this before. Haven't even told my wife yet, since I don't want to sound like I've lost it. And this might be a bit long, so thank you in advance for reading. I'm 27. I have a stable job, and my wife and I have been married for almost 2 years now. We got a sweet little boy who's about to turn 6. Earlier this summer, around May, we moved into a new rental house. Not a fancy place, but cozy enough for us. 2 bedrooms, 1.5 baths, decent backyard for the kid. Felt like a fresh start. The first month was pretty normal. You know, the usual new place feeling, boxes everywhere and late night takeout, finding where things go. But toward late June, small things started happening. And at first, I didn't think much of it. My phone would end up in weird spots like on the kitchen counter when I could have sworn I left it in the charger in the bedroom. Shoes would be in the hallway, even though I put them in the closet. My wife and son said they didn't touch them, and I just assumed I was being forgetful. Then, lights started flickering randomly. We figured at the time it was old wiring. I mean, sometimes the bathroom sink would start running on its own. A little bit unnerving, but we blamed the loose faucet handle. The back door would be cracked open some mornings, even though I was sure I had locked it. We have an old house. I told myself old houses do weird things. Around the end of July, things got stranger. I began having these really vivid dreams, the kind where you wake up with your heart pounding but can't remember exactly why. And no matter when I went to bed, I started waking up at 2:17 a.m. every single night. I've never been that consistent with anything in my life, but somehow my body just snapped awake at the same time. Then came the feeling of being touched. Not a breeze, not a blanket slipping. Felt like somebody placing their hand lightly on my arm or shoulder. I'd jolt awake and ask my wife why she was touching me. And every time she'd say that she wasn't, and it wasn't nightly, but it was often enough to mess with my head. The worst part, constant feeling that someone is watching me. You know that cold pressure on the back of your neck when you know eyes are on you? It's like that, but every single night. And the thing that finally broke me happened just 3 nights ago. I got off work around 1:30, got home maybe about 2. My wife had an early shift. I decided to crash on the couch and watch a bit of a show I've been trying to finish. Fell asleep early, maybe 3:30. TV still's on. Stills. TV still on. I woke up with that same pressure on my shoulder, like somebody gently pushing down, and sat up fast. And our house has an open floor plan, so from the couch I can see the whole kitchen and part of the hallway. Every single cabinet door was wide open, oven door too. Even the closet door next to the pantry was swung out. I just froze. My first thought was someone's in the house. I grabbed my bat, and I don't keep a gun. I went room to room, and there was nothing. Every window locked. No sign of forced entry. And weirdest thing is when I snapped a quick picture to show my wife later, the image looked distorted, like light had smeared. I don't even know how to describe it. I'm not exactly a superstitious person. I honestly don't know how to explain what's been going on. Planning to start praying more regularly. Maybe going to church more than twice a month, but right now I just need someone to tell me I'm not losing my mind. The room at my doorstep. I want to share a strange story told to me by somebody my friend once introduced me to. Let's call her Sarah. This was something that happened in the first house she ever lived in as a child. Right next to the front door, there's a narrow little room, not big enough for a living room, too awkward to be a bedroom. Had no windows, no furniture, just an old wooden floor and faint wallpaper peeling at the edges. The door to that room was always closed. No one in her family ever went inside. Sarah remembered that everyone quietly pretended the room didn't exist. Never said anything about it, but the air around that door was heavy, as if some unspoken rule kept it sealed there. One cloudy afternoon, when Sarah was 9 and home alone after school, a gust of wind rattled the house. For the first time, she noticed the door wasn't completely shut. It had cracked open just a little bit. Her heart was pounding, but curiosity pushed harder than fear. She slowly turned the doorknob and stepped inside. And the air was cold. Space was filled with cardboard boxes, an old wardrobe with peeling paint, the faint smell of dust, and something sweetly rotten. At the very back, on the top of a trunk, sat a single porcelain doll. It had porcelain white skin, blonde curls dulled with age. They were pale blue glass eyes, and they shimmered in the light from the hallway. The faded rose-pink dress frilled at the edges. Sarah felt certain those eyes would follow her. Not just stare, but noticed her. In a box near her feet, she found a photo album, heavier than it looked. She flipped through the yellowing pages and saw her parents smiling with a little girl she had never seen before. A girl about 6, ribbons in her hair. But Sarah was an only child. She closed the album quickly, shoved it back, trying to ignore the uneasy chill creeping down her spine. That night she woke with a start. Something pressed down on her chest. It was as though small feet were bouncing rhythmically on top of her. She couldn't move, couldn't scream, only stare at the dark ceiling, frozen as the pressure grew heavier and heavier. Happened again the next night, and the next after that, and for an entire week she barely slept. She finally told her parents. Their faces went pale, and just for a second, before her mother forced a smile and said, "It's nothing, sweetheart, don't think about it." But something in their eyes told her they knew. Days later, she gathered her courage to peek into the room again. The doll and the album were gone. The strange nightly visits didn't stop. Her parents grew tense and quiet at dinner. And then one evening, her father called her and sat her down in the living room. Before Sarah was born, they had a daughter, and she had died in an accident about 6 years old. The doll had been hers, a birthday gift, and after the tragedy, they couldn't bear to throw away anything that belonged to her. Everything, the clothes, the toys, the photos, had been kept in that room, hidden and frozen in time. But lately, the room wouldn't stay shut. Shoes at the front door were found overturned, and some nights they heard soft footsteps in the hallway, like a child running barefoot. And the doll, even when locked in a glass case, would be found turned to face the door, as though waiting for someone to open it. Despite her parents invited a priest they trusted to bless the house, he told them something none of them wanted to hear. The doll, it had become a vessel for their late daughter's spirit, a soul still wandering because it had been left behind, unacknowledged. Her parents finally faced the truth, and together they gathered the things in the room, whispered prayers, held a small private ceremony. The doll was burned after a cleansing ritual at the church, along with most of their old belongings. Only 3 photographs were kept, framed, placed gently on a side table in the living room. The strange phenomena stopped. Sarah, she said she could never forget the night her parents stood in front of those framed photos, whispering through their own tears, "We're sorry, we should have told you sooner." And every year on her sister's birthday, they lighted candles and placed flowers beside the frames. And Sarah told me softly, like she was talking to someone unseen, "I think she still lives here, just in a different way now. You and me both." The light beneath the abandoned hospital. This isn't exactly a ghost story either. More like a memory of a strange and unsettling place. A place where something inexplicable happened and never quite left my mind. It was the summer of 1990. I was part of a youth drama troupe rehearsing a quirky adaptation of Peter Pan. Our director somehow managed to get us access to the old recreation hall at Hillside State Hospital. It was for the summer rehearsals and shows. The hospital campus stretched over acres of overgrown lawns, dotted with red brick buildings dating back to the 1880s. There were wards, offices, workshops, a small chapel, a laundry house, and a road shaded by massive elms. At first glance, it looked more like an old college than a hospital, quiet and dignified and eerily beautiful. By then, most of the hospital had been shut down. The building stood hollow and silent, peeling paint and windows like blind eyes. Recreation Hall was no exception. Shabby but sturdy and perfect for a makeshift stage. Anyone who'd ever been in a community theater knows there's plenty of downtime. When you're not in the scene, you're sitting around, and in our case, sitting around quickly turned into exploring. After we'd crept through the costume storage room and discovered the abandoned cafeteria, we stumbled upon a narrow service corridor. That's how we found the tunnels. These concrete tunnels stretched like secret veins beneath the hospital grounds, linking building to building. Some were unlocked, though pitch dark, dusty, and carrying a damp metallic smell. Daring each other on, we climbed past wire gates and slipped into forgotten basements. Being 16 and reckless, felt like we were walking through the set of our own horror movie. The old wards were worse than we imagined. Cracked green tiles, rusted beds with straps still attached. A hallway jammed with wheelchairs. Floors seemed to sag underneath your feet. And there were bathrooms where porcelain sinks hung at odd angles and sunrooms with broken windows. They let in just enough light to make the shadows feel alive. And it was fascinating, sure. But, well, it was deeply sad. You could almost feel the lives that had once filled those spaces. And we ended up in the basement of a building. It felt like a maze. The walls were flaking, air was heavy, silence complete. It was clear no one had stepped down there in years. We managed to slip back out and avoid the single bored security guard who barely looked up from his radio, Rehearsal stretched late that night, and around dusk, a few of us wandered outside, strolling between buildings with the heat of the day fading into a cool, soft wind. That's when I saw it. One of the basement windows of the building we'd explored earlier was glowing faintly. A light, steady and warm, sort of shone from inside. Shouldn't have been on. There's no working electricity in that part of the hospital. No reason for anyone to be down there. I cut into my friend's conversation and said, "Hey, look." We turned just in time to see the light snap off. The building fell back into darkness. There was no sound, no footsteps, no beam of a flashlight moving away. Just the sudden heavy silence of a place long abandoned. The hospital was torn down years later, swallowed by weeds and time. I still think about that glowing basement window and the fact that someone or something was down there with us that summer. The man in the corner. I was in my bedroom one night, door wide open, half watching TV, when something caught the corner of my eye. Right there in the middle of the living room, a pair of men's boots. Not just boots, they were glowing faintly like old lantern glass. And this thin wisp of smoke was swirling around them. There was no body, no legs, no boots. Well, rather, just boots. Slowly, they turned and walked out of my line of sight, silent as fog. And I know how this sounds. Smoky boots walking off into the night. But weird stuff is practically part of the rent here, so over time, every time something got knocked over or disappeared, we just shrug and blame it on our house ghost that we named Leroy. Fast forward about 3 years. I was moving some heavy, dusty wood panels that had been leaning against the entry hallway since forever. I always thought it was just a solid wall behind them. Turns out it wasn't. A hidden utility closet. It was surprisingly spacious, like somebody had sealed away a little piece of the house a long time ago. That night, after the little quote-unquote discovery, I flopped down on the living room couch. The lights were dim, and then there he was, a man, sitting calmly in a wooden stool in the corner, like he had been there forever. His body shimmered like those boots, semi-transparent and bluish and misty, and he was wearing overalls, a work shirt, a hat, and the exact same boots, and he was tall, African-American. A face I could clearly make out, hair, eyes, the shine on the buttons on his shirt. And actually, truly was unreal how real it was. I whispered to my roommate that there was someone in the corner. My roommate, bless his curious soul, he asked me what I was seeing. And that's when the man spoke. "I like the name you gave me," he said. The voice was low but clear. "But it's not my name." And just like that, something clicked in my head like someone whispering inside my skull. One word, Leonard. He then added, "You found my space. You can keep it open during the day, but close it at night." I froze, and he looked toward the window and said, "The man outside can't come in. He never will." And my stomach dropped because, I'd seen someone out there before. A man with his palms and face pressed against the glass, always outside and always watching. One of the creepiest things I'd ever experienced. Before fading, Leonard said one last thing. "Be careful what you find in the backyard." And honestly, that's not vague for me. I've dug up weird things back there. An old mirror from the 1930s and rusted coins and shells and even a liquor bottle that made me violently sick when I stupidly took a sip. God knows what else is buried under that dirt. Leonard, he isn't a menace. He's more like a silent guard. He doesn't go to the backyard, and he was in my room once, just once. But after I asked him to leave, he quietly disappeared. I always felt like he'd been chasing something away. Never seen him again in person. Still follow what he told me. I think this house used to be some kind of utility hub for the neighborhood, and Leonard might have been the technician here. The house was built in 1904 by architect Julia Morgan, and maybe, just maybe, never really left his post. The Girl at the River's Edge. I heard this story from a guy I met completely by chance one evening at a small, quiet pub. We're both sitting at the counter, and somehow our casual talk over whiskey turned into something deeper. And as always, I asked him my favorite question. Have you ever seen a ghost or something not quite normal? He paused, fingers tapping lightly on his glass, and then he said with a crooked smile, I don't know if it was a ghost, but there was one night I almost crossed over. And this is what he told me. About a year and a half ago, he had a near-death experience. He was working at a dockside warehouse, and while unloading some steel beams, one of them slipped. It swung down, cracked him hard in the side of the head, and he blacked out instantly. They say people see a tunnel with light at the end, he told me. I didn't see a tunnel, I saw a meadow. He found himself standing in the middle of darkness, so heavy it felt almost wet. And ahead of him was a glowing stretch of pale yellow wildflowers swaying gently. It was like it was in a summer breeze. A small river shimmered beside the field. He could hear the soft murmur of running water. Across the river stood faces he recognized. His grandmother, an old friend from high school, his childhood dog even, waiting quietly. They didn't speak, but their hands reached out toward him, urging him to come closer. In that moment, he just knew if he stepped across, he'd never return. And something primal in him screamed, no! So he spun around, ran in the opposite direction toward the void. The strange thing was, the glowing meadow, though beautiful, filled him with a dread deeper than anything he'd ever felt. Every instinct pushed him back into the black. Then, a girl appeared in front of him. She looked about 12, wearing a plain summer dress. Her hair was tangled, but her smile was strangely calm. He tried to sidestep her, but his legs wouldn't move. Who are you? He asked. The girl tilted her head and said softly, I'm just someone in a dream. This is your dream too. If you go into that dark space, it'll twist. It'll turn into something ugly. It's safer if you stay here. A lady in white told me the same thing. In that, his panic eased just a little. So it's just a dream, he thought. He stayed with her for a while, talking about nothing in particular. Sunlight and rivers and things that didn't make sense but felt comforting. And then, without a sound, she vanished. Silence fell. And then from the direction of the meadow came a whisper. Help me, help me. The girl's voice. He ran toward the river. What he saw wasn't the peaceful field anymore. The flowers were dead and blackened. The water ran red. Chains, dozens of them. They slithered out of the ground like metallic snakes, wrapping around the girl's limbs and digging in and lifting her up like a broken marionette. Her mouth opened in a silent scream. Behind her, the people he'd recognized stood again. Family, friends, but their faces were wrong, skin too pale, clothes soaked in blood. Their smiles stretched far too wide. That was the moment he understood that this wasn't a dream. terror ripped through him, sprinted back into the dark. Faces emerged in the black, distorted and howling, brushing against his arms like cold hands, but he didn't stop. Then with a sudden jolt, he opened his eyes. He was lying on a hospital bed. The white figures around him made him scream before he realized they were just nurses. "I've never been so happy to see someone alive," he said. And later, when he told his friends, they made jokes like, "Was Freddy there too? Sounds like you met Pinhead." He just smiled, because whatever that place was, it wasn't just a dream. "If I'd stepped into that river," he told me, "I don't think I'd be here now." He touched the side of his head right where the scar was hidden underneath his hair. "I don't ever want to hit my head again," he added quietly. And for a moment, the busy noise of the bar faded, leaving only the sound of his voice. The Man with the Crooked Smile. For background context, I've never really had any weird or paranormal experiences before this. And this happened earlier this year, probably around late February, early March. I was finishing some work late at night in my basement, and by the time I wrapped up, I was too tired to climb upstairs to my room. There's an old couch down there that folds into a bed, so I just decided to crash there for the night. At first, I had a totally normal dream, kind of random, long one with different people coming and going. But near the end of it, things got strange. My dream started zooming in on each character's face one by one. It was like the curtain call at the end of a play. One person after another, smiling blankly. Then it zoomed in on this one guy I didn't recognize, maybe mid-20s, pale skin, long black hair. They were wearing what looked like an old wool sweater, and he was grinning. But something was wrong. His eyes weren't round. They were stretched into upside-down triangles. The scene moved on to the next character like nothing happened. Something inside of me screamed, "Wait, that wasn't right." Instantly, the dream snapped back to the man with the black hair. And this time, he was facing me directly. Same grin, but the edges of his mouth looked sharper and wider, and his eyes flickered like there was a small fire behind them. He knew I saw him. I jolted awake and my face burning hot like somebody had just been hovering close over me. And right then I heard it. The sound of heavy footsteps sprinting across the floor away from my bed, straight into the pitch-black hallway. I didn't even try to be brave. I ran upstairs and locked myself in my room. The next morning, I felt unsettled. But work was piling up and I couldn't waste time thinking about some creepy dream and weird footsteps. I shoved it to the back of my mind. That night, I ended up back in the basement again. Same reason, too much work and too little energy. Didn't even think about the night before. I fell asleep fast. But at around 4 or 5 a.m., I woke up suddenly, and again footsteps. Clear as day, rushing away from the bed. Turned on my phone's flashlight, started walking toward the stairs. But halfway down the hallway, something hit me. Not fear exactly, something worse, a wave of cold, heavy dread wrapped around me like a wet blanket. My heart wasn't racing. It was like it had forgot how to beat. The light was on. I could see the hallway was empty. But every part of my body screamed that something was standing there watching. My legs simply wouldn't move. The only thing I managed to do was press call on my girlfriend's contact. She picked up, confused but awake, and I begged her to just stay on the line. That tiny bit of human presence helped. The dread faded just enough for me to take a couple of shaky steps toward the stairs. And that's when I felt it. The back of my hoodie lifted, not brushed, not tugged, but lifted. It was like somebody had hooked a finger under the fabric and was pulling straight up on it. That snapped whatever freeze I was in, and my legs unlocked, and I sprinted like hell up the stairs. I slammed the door and didn't stop running until I was back in my room. After that, nothing else happened. I've been down in that basement plenty of times since. No footsteps, no weird feelings. There was nothing. But I haven't slept down there once. Still think about that man, and his grin wasn't human. His eyes looked like they were trying to fit in, but didn't know how. And the creepiest part is it felt like he wasn't part of the dream. It felt like he entered it and didn't expect to get caught. Whispers above Astoria. Alright, so I've mentioned the Astoria Underground before as the place where we first crossed paths with Wyatt's brother, Thomas. But what often gets overlooked is that not all the ghosts in Astoria prefer the dark. Some wander beneath the open sky. Before my husband and I settled in Washington for good, we used to drive down to Oregon every few months to visit his family. On one of those summer trips, we decided to stop by the Astoria Column. If you've never been there, it's this tall, spiraling monument that's perched up on a hill. It's almost like a lighthouse within the beam. It's dedicated to Lewis and Clark's journey. Or a lighthouse without the beam of light. The trip just happened to fall on my birthday in July, which ironically is the one day of the year I'd rather pretend doesn't exist. Before heading up to the column, we wandered around downtown. My brother-in-law, who is way too good at keeping secrets, was off buying something behind my back. So while my mother-in-law and I drifted from shop to shop admiring the displays. And that's when I thought I heard my husband call my name. Clear, sharp. The kind of call that makes your stomach drop. I turned, expecting to see him behind me. The sidewalk was empty. Rolled my eyes at myself, hearing my name called when no one was there. It's practically background noise in my life. Kept walking. A minute later, as we paused in front of a window, there was this display of vintage photographs. And I saw a man's reflection standing right behind me. My pulse jumped like it had a life of its own. He wasn't just a shadow or a trick of the light. He was there watching me through the glass. Here's the thing. At that time, only my husband knew about the whole I sometimes see dead people situation. So I did what I always do. I pretended to be looking for my husband and brother-in-law, hoping the man would just blink out like they usually do when they realize I can see them. But he didn't. He stayed, still as a photograph, his mouth just barely moving like he was trying to speak. When my husband and brother-in-law finally came back, I turned around to face the sidewalk, and there he was, inches away, his eyes locked onto mine. I forced myself to look through him and straight at my husband. He must have read the panic on my face. He hurried over, wrapped his arms around me, and just like that, the man was gone, like someone had flipped a switch. And that's when my brother-in-law handed me the small gift bag with earrings that he swears to this day he didn't buy. And he's a terrible liar, by the way. After that little encounter, I insisted we drive up to the Astoria Column. Maybe it was the adrenaline, maybe it was something else, but I needed to stand somewhere high and solid, somewhere where I could see everything below me. The wind was sharp that day, and as it rushed past my ears, I could almost swear I heard a faint whisper trailing behind it. Ghosts aren't just in dark corners. Sometimes they stand right beside you, waiting for someone to notice. So the last time I told you about Astoria, it ended with me spotting a man I'd seen earlier wandering the streets. But this time at the Astoria Column, you've never been there, the Astoria Column isn't exactly a lighthouse, but it stands tall like one, perched on top of a hill in Astor Park, Astoria, Oregon. The outside spirals upward with scenes from Oregon's early history, from Lewis and Clark to the arrival of pioneers. You can climb the narrow staircase inside to an open deck at the top. And fair warning, it's always packed, and those 164 steps can feel endless. But the view, it's breathtaking. For the first time I noticed him, I thought nothing of it, just another stranger in town. But on our next trip to visit my husband's family, things were different. This time his brother and girlfriend joined us for the climb. I remember feeling healthier and more energized back then. So the idea of climbing didn't bother me, and honestly, I tucked away that odd encounter in the back of my mind, almost forgotten at that point. We parked near the column, picked up those little wooden planes you can launch from the top. A sweet, simple tradition. I was laughing with my husband, his brother, his girlfriend. That's when I walked straight past the base of the tower, and that's when I saw him again, sitting on the steps, head slightly tilted, watching me. Didn't register it right away. I actually walked through him. The realization sent a cold shiver down my spine. And suddenly, that memory the first time I saw him came flooding back to me. I turned casually, pretending not to care, and there he was, grinning at me like he'd been expecting me all along. My heart nearly leapt out of my chest. I forced myself to keep walking. Inside, the staircase spiraled tightly upward. Every creak of my shoes echoed, and with each step I could feel him behind me, not touching, but following me. By the time we reached the halfway point, I felt dizzy from trying to keep my focus forward while pretending he wasn't there. I leaned against the wall, trying to steady my breath. My husband noticed and paused with me. I whispered about the man. Without missing a beat, he leaned closer, pretending we were having a normal conversation so I could respond without looking like I was talking to air. The man didn't seem threatening, and if anything, there was a tiredness in his eyes. Kind of waiting, and then it clicked. He had been waiting for me to come back. He said others like me, people who could see, had ignored him, and I was the only one who'd ever acknowledged his presence. As the narrator's headphones fly off of his head and land behind him. Excuse me. And so, step by step, as we climbed that narrow stairwell, he began to tell me a story. My name is William, born in a small fishing village near Chesapeake Bay, Virginia. When I was 10, Father decided we'd leave everything behind and follow a caravan west. Not on the Oregon Trail this time, but a lesser-known wagon route that snaked along the Columbia River. I was the youngest of 5. My sister Margaret was the eldest. Then came Elias, Caroline, and the twins Henry and Harold. Henry and Harold were fragile children, prone to fever and chills. They didn't make it past the first winter on the trail. We buried them beneath a grove of cedar trees. He rubbed the back of his neck slowly. When we reached Fort Tillicum, Margaret married a carpenter stationed there. Elias left to trap and trade upriver. Caroline became the village midwife, and I stayed with Father at the forge. In time, Margaret and her children moved to the coast to follow her husband's work. Elias never returned. Some say he became a part of a native tribe far upstream. Caroline stayed, stubborn and strong, helping to build a clinic next to the church. Mother had passed from fever long before Margaret left. And Father didn't take it kindly. He drowned himself in whiskey, and his anger always found me. I was the last one left to absorb the weight of his grief, and when war rumbled in the east, Margaret's letters arrived regularly. They were little angers telling me and her family were safe. But Father grew crueler. He beat me for not being a soldier like Margaret's husband. tried to enlist for the Union troops who passed through the fort. I was too thin and too weak and too far from the front. Then came Dr. Langford, a man who had been wounded in the fighting back east. He saw what Father did to me. He and his wife gave me room above their small apothecary. I took it, half out of desperation, half out of pride, and under their care I grew stronger. And by the time Father died, I had enough muscle and skill to keep the forge alive, but by then the war had nearly ended. My chance to fight was gone like smoke in the wind. I lived a quiet life after that. I gifted the smithy to Nathan, Father's apprentice, as a wedding present. Margaret wrote from the coast. Caroline brought bread and fresh herbs and scolded me like only a stern midwife could. She always reminded me to write Margaret back, and I always told her no. Truth was, my heart had been broken long before. Nathan and I, we shared something that had no name back then. I chuckled softly at the memory. He stared at me unsure, and I told him I wasn't Christian. I wouldn't hold his love against him. His face lit up like a boy seeing the first snow. When the silence became too heavy, I crossed the river to look for Elias. The native tribe there told me a man matching his description had died during a hunt, buried under the watch of their ancestors. They said he had taken a woman as his wife, and they had 2 children, Thomas and Elisa. They brought me to a small cedar cabin my brother had built himself. I stayed there for a few years, watching my niece and nephew grow up among the whispering trees. Then word reached me. Margaret was gone. Caroline followed not long after, and I was alone. Eventually, Elias's wife remarried, and I returned to Fort Telecom, older and quieter, hands still remembering the heat of the forge, though. He smiled at the distant tree line. I helped raise the beams of the bell tower, he said. I'm glad it still stands. He paused and looked at me. Nathan, we never spoke again of it. Never stopped thinking of him. I pointed down to the base of the hill. An indigenous man stood there, looking up at him, and his eyes were soft and full of years, and William whispered a name I couldn't catch. And just like that, he was gone, down the slope. His steps light for a man who had carried so much weight. They disappeared into the forest, arms wrapped around each other, and sometimes when I look toward the old bell tower at dusk, I still see their silhouettes, 2 souls finally walking side by side. Whispers in the quiet morning. So my grandma passed in late March, and I kept pushing off writing this down because it still it stings when I think about it. And even now I still get emotional remembering those days. People, my parents included, keep giving me crap for not being at her memorial. Just to explain a little, I've always been spiritually sensitive. Graveyards or spiritually heavy places drain me fast. It's like my chest tightens and my energy just gets pulled away from me. That's why I usually just keep my distance. A week before she passed, my grandma went to urgent care once. Then the ER a second time when things got worse. My cousin Kai, not his real name, rode with her in the ambulance along with her caregiver. On the way there, she suddenly sat up straight, almost like she was startled, and then slowly laid back down. Later, they said it was a small heart attack, and it wasn't fatal, but it sped everything up. Doctors explained she didn't have long left. Her lungs were already failing from a chronic illness. They could only keep her comfortable. She stayed in the hospital about 10 days. And early one morning, my aunt, her eldest, called everyone to come because Grandma had been asking for all of her kids and grandkids. I didn't go. Hadn't slept properly for days and felt something pressing in on me, like I already knew it was her time. Not long after everyone left, My head was flooded with thoughts, dark and heavy ones I didn't even recognize as being my own. Depression and self-hate, intrusive ideas that actually scared me. I managed to fight them off, and at some point, exhaustion knocked me out. At 7:46 in the morning, I jolted awake like somebody had shaken me. I couldn't breathe properly for a minute, and as I sat up trying to steady myself, my phone buzzed with the message, "She's gone." At first, I didn't believe it. I just stared at the screen like it was lying to me. But reality hit slow and cold, and she was gone. From that time onward, I wouldn't hear her laugh again. Everyone came back home to mourn. I was told I could stay behind, but honestly, I didn't want to be around my parents. Grandma practically raised me. I knew they'd throw that fact at me to make me feel guilty for not being there at the end. I didn't have work that day, but I needed to get out and clear my head my own way. While I was changing into my work clothes anyway, something happened. As I slid my arm into the sleeve, I felt a hand on the inside of my elbow. Gentle and warm, like someone trying to comfort me. I just froze there. I placed my other hand in the same spot, but there was nothing. The door to my left was closed, window to my right blocked by boxes, and behind me was her old bed. No one else was there. I honestly believe it was her, reaching out not to scare me, but to let me know she wasn't angry, that she understood why I couldn't be there. And even now, months later, I still get chills remembering that touch. Strange how love can still find a way to speak, even after everything goes quiet. Whispers in the Oh no, I can't say words in Thai. Whispers of the Figa. Anyway, so I once heard this story from a friend's older cousin who spent a summer in a quiet rural town near Chiang Rai in northern Thailand. Back then, he was a third-year student, and every long break, he and a circle of friends would travel to random places together. But that particular summer, his buddy Kiet couldn't join the group trip because he had to return home to help his family with their small farm. So instead of going south with the others, the cousin decided to tag along with Kiet. He'd never been that far north anyway. Kiet's father agreed but reminded them, quite seriously too, make sure you're home before 7 p.m. The cousin thought it was just one of those village curfews or something to do with wild animals. When they arrived, Kiet's family greeted them warmly, and his father, a gentleman with a loud laugh, his aunt who cooked with unmatched skill, and an elderly woman everybody called May Noi. At lunch, May Noi had her own bowl of a crimson-red soup. She slurped noisily and clearly enjoying every drop of it. Curious, the cousin asked what it was. "It's lu," Kiet's father said. "Raw pig's blood with minced meat and herbs. We've been eating it for generations." The cousin forced a polite smile. He'd had pig's blood before, but never raw. Yuck. That afternoon, Kiet took him around town on an old motorbike. Before they left, Kiet's aunt repeated, "Back before 7, okay?" He nodded absent-mindedly. On their ride, they passed by two strikingly pretty girls, hair flowing behind them on a blue Honda Wave. One glanced at him and smiled, and he smiled back, and that was it, a fleeting summer moment. I know that bike. Or so he thought. Later that evening, at the night bazaar, they bumped into the same girls again. And this time they were near a fruit stall, laughing about something only they knew. Cousin didn't dare to speak, just exchanged another shy smile. But when they asked the vendor nearby, they learned one of the girls was the daughter of the herbal medicine shop owner near the river. Jackpot, he thought. That night, something happened. Passing through the kitchen on his way to the bathroom, he caught May Noy's reflection in the glass cabinet. Or rather, not just hers. There was a second face hovering beside hers. It was blackened and peeling, and its mouth open in an awful grin. He spun around, and there was nothing. The kitchen was empty, except for her quiet stirring the pot. The next day, Kid egged him to visit the herbal shop. "Just buy a drink and say hi," Kid teased. He finally worked up the courage. The bell above the door jingled as he stepped inside. A woman was at the counter writing in a ledger. "Excuse me, I'd like to pay," he said awkwardly, holding a bottle of chrysanthemum tea. The woman looked up and his stomach dropped. She wasn't the same young woman he saw last night. She looked at least 45. "We saw each other at the bazaar, didn't we?" she said, with her lips curling. He mumbled something, paid, and fled outside, where Kid was laughing so hard he nearly fell off the bike. Turns out those girls weren't girls at all. And in that village, many families secretly kept a Fi-Ka spirit, an old practice. The spirit, they said, licked its host's face at night, making them appear young and beautiful by day. A free skincare routine, courtesy of a ghost. "I will take one of those, thank you." Don't know about the licking part, but apparently it came with a price. Once bound, it could never be abandoned. Had to be passed on, and if ignored, it would turn violent. And that night, Kid convinced him to look at the shopwoman the right way, as they put it. So at the bazaar, Kid dropped his keys, signaling the cousin to bend down and peek at her through his legs. An old trick to see spirits in their true form. Okay. And there it was, a small monkey-like creature clung to her back, its long tongue dragging across her cheek. "Alrighty then." He shot upright, horrified, and she caught him staring, and they bolted. And on their last night in the village, the family gathered for dinner. Laughter filled the house until he mentioned the Fi-Ka, and the air instantly tightened. May Noy, with a gentle but unnerving smile, asked, "Do you believe?" He joked and said, "Of course, if I had one, girls would like me too." Later, just as he was headed to bed, May Noy stopped him. She opened a small wooden box and pulled out a delicate gold bangle, the kind that shimmered even in the dim light. She whispered, "If you believe this can be yours." Something inside of him hesitated, but before he could even speak, Kid's aunt burst in. "Don't touch it!" He was rushed to his room. No explanations that night. The next morning, Kid's aunt told him the truth. May Noy wasn't Kid's real grandmother. She was a mistress of Kid's late grandfather, who had fallen hopelessly in love with her under the Fi-Ka spell. Now old and frail, she needed a successor, and he, the outsider, was the perfect candidate. The bangle wasn't just jewelry, it was a vessel, the transfer medium for the spirit. And that 7 p.m. curfew I told you about wasn't about wolves or wild animals. Some spirits, neglected and wandering, roamed freely after sunset. So if someone ever offers you something glittering and free, think twice. You might not just be getting a gift. You might be getting a ghost. I'd still take it. Whispers in the Garden. Keep your voice down, sweetheart. Daddy needs some quiet. I nodded and turned back to the worksheet, where long division problems stared back at me like a quiet dare. I pressed my pencil harder than I meant to, tip squeaking against the paper. My younger sister leaned toward me, whispering, "How do you do this one again, 7 times 9? I hesitated, glancing over to my father slouched in his recliner. The TV flickered with the baseball game, announcer's voice competing with the steady hum of the ceiling fan. "Shut the hell up," my father muttered, rubbing his temples. "Go make noise outside." "But I need help with my math," my sister said softly. She never quite learned when to stop. The next thing we heard was the crack of his beer can hitting the table. "Get out!" he snapped, his foot shoving the footstool hard enough to knock over a half-eaten sandwich, mayonnaise smeared across the rug like a bruise. "And clean it up before your mother sees," he barked. We didn't clean it up. We bolted through the screen door, letting it slap shut behind us like a full stop. Outside, the air was thick and green with summer. Our backyard wasn't big, but to us it was a kingdom. The sagging wooden fence marked the border between safety and everything else. There were plum trees near the back and a rusty shed that became our fortress during imaginary wars against dragon kings and plastic sword-wielding armies. I slowed as I approached the garden, and there as always was Nene. Her sun hat was too big and the brim drooping like an umbrella. Her hands were busy coaxing stubborn weeds out of the soil, and she spoke no English, and my Tagalog was only a scattering of nouns. "Nene, help," I said, pointing to the weeds and mimicking her motion. She laughed, her shoulders shaking like wind through leaves, and handing me a small trowel. Even from the garden, we could hear my father's voice rising again inside the house. She didn't look up, she just kind of pointed at the soil, showing me to dig deeper. I pulled at a dandelion and it snapped. She gently took my hand, pressing it down into the earth, and showed me how to feel for the root. I imagined the weeds were enemy scouts, and the eggplants and tomatoes were peaceful villagers relying on us for protection. It made the work lighter. The memories of Nene were always quiet ones. Hands in the dirt, smell of mint and soil, soft hum of her voice as she worked. She was patient in a way no one else in the house was. She taught me how to keep something alive, even when everything around us felt like it might fall apart. I didn't know then that the colorful scarves she wore were covering the absence of her hair. I didn't know she was sick. One night I woke up and the house was wrapped in silver light. She stood at the foot of my bed, her hat replaced by a bright green scarf and her smile calm and soft, exactly the way she always smiled when the world was loud. She lifted a finger to her lips and mouthed the words I understood without translation. "Okay, everything will be okay." The next morning, I told her she had passed away at my aunt's house across town. Never told anybody that she'd come to see me, but for all the years after, through every storm life sent my way, I never doubted it happened. Nene had found a way to say goodbye to me. The Mirror-site. It lives in your body, feasting on your mind. The first time I noticed it at the time was at my mom's birthday. It was raining. The wind and water slapped against my window as the wind wipers clung on for dear life, desperately trying to erase the rain. I got out of the car, excitedly standing on the front doorstep with presents in hand. I gave the door 3 sharp raps when I was met with my mom's sleep-deprived face. Eye bags hung below her baby blue eyes, and her matted blonde, grayish hair hung sorrowfully down her shoulders. "Hi, son, why are you here?" I cut her off with an excited yell. "Happy birthday, Mom." She stared at me in confusion, as if somebody had just told her that I wasn't her son. "What do you mean?" she exclaimed. A tinge of worry stained her words. "Isn't it your birthday?" I questioned, pretty perplexed. "No, don't tell me you forgot my birthday. Did you hit your head?" "No, it's your birthday today, isn't it?" I said. Annoyance flushed my brain. "No, it's not. Go home. It's pouring down. What are you, insane?" I accepted my losses. I walked back to my car. It was her birthday today, I was sure of it. I felt wrong, and something was definitely wrong. Deep inside my body, I chalked it up to a simple mistake, but deep down I knew something was wrong. The same night I sat down on my couch, I listened to the now gentle rain patter against the glass panes. I felt myself dozing off to sleep. I knew nothing. I couldn't walk or talk or even speak. I stumbled around in a daze, clueless of where I was or who I even was. I don't know anything, but I knew what I felt, and it was true fear. I clung on to anything I'd get my hands on. I didn't know how to use them. Dishes clattered to the floor. I slipped and fell, and I woke drenched in sweat. I clutched my heart as if it would burrow out of my chest. Stumbled up off the couch when I spotted something. It was me. It wasn't me, but it looked like me. Copied my movements, but it wasn't me. I watched my double. My mouth became intensely dry and the blood drained from my face. I raised a hand and it copied. I darted to my bedroom and slammed the door behind me, nearly knocking it off of its hinges. I hastily shut the deadlock. I breathed a sigh of relief. I lay in my bed completely still, too scared to move or make any sound. I tossed and turned for the rest of the night. The rest of the week went as normal, other than the dates and work I had oddly forgotten about. I'd arrived home from work one night. The golden sunlight poured through my windows when I noticed somebody pulling up in my driveway. I stared in confusion as I watched a person get out of the car. They looked familiar, but I couldn't place who it was that they were. I watched as they speedily walked up my garden path. I watched in horror as the woman pulled out a key and unlocked my front door. How did they have my house key? As the door unlocked, I hastily snatched a kitchen knife from my counter, stepped back as the intruder entered my house, my safe place. "Get away, who are you? Get out of my house," I frantically yelled. My voice quivered as fear engulfed my body. "Honey, calm down, it's me." They replied pretty calmly, too calmly. They spoke as if they knew me personally. I'd never met her in my life. No, I'm not your honey, go away," I yelled, fear stinging my throat. The woman stepped forward and I stepped back, and in disbelief. Primal instincts flooded my brain as my fight-or-flight responses came into action. I felt the knife plunge into her abdomen as shrieks of terror rose from the intruder. She kept screaming, "Oh my God, help me!" I listened as her voice grew fainter and gargled, and her breath became shallower. It was soon replaced with frantic wheezing as she violently convulsed. I stabbed and stabbed and stabbed. Blood splattered on my white shirt and my carpet, dyeing it bright red. She was completely still. My hand shook violently as I'd realized what I'd just done. Sprinted to my room, not looking back, and the metallic tang of blood covered the air. And just as I reached my room, I felt my legs give way. I tried to stand, but I couldn't, and it was as if I couldn't remember how to do it at all, really, and I dragged like myself, and my useless legs went to bed where I lay, processing what I'd just done. I stared at my wall when I noticed a small framed photograph. It was of me and the woman. She was in a beautiful white dress with thin cloth covering her face, and I was standing next to her in a black blazer. My attention quickly diverted as I listened to my horrified whisper quickly turn into murmurs. I couldn't speak, and I tried to call for help, but I couldn't remember my password. When I eventually logged on, I couldn't remember the emergency number. I dragged my body over to my laptop, desperately tried to log on. Frantically searched for answers as more of my memory fell slightly out of grasp. And that's where I learned about the marasite. It's a type of species that's ingested by the host, where it then feasts on the mind and memories. When you eventually thirst to death, it lays eggs which gnaw through your tissues and spread like wildfire. I'm using the last of my sanity to type this out before I forget how to spell, and soon all I know will be gone. Someone or anybody, please help them. What's wrong with me? That has to be a fiction story. If not, well, that was interesting. My household ghost talked to my niece and daughter. I, a 25-year-old male, moved into a new house in November. I'm renting, so I have a 12-month lease. And honestly, I love the house, but there's definitely something paranormal here. It started with small things, like lights flickering and my bedroom light turning off when it wasn't even touched. I chalked it up to electrical problems. Then, about a month into us living here, my 27-year-old girlfriend started saying she felt like something was watching her, and the house was creepy when she was alone. Allegedly. Excuse me. A few weeks after that, we started randomly hearing footsteps in our ceiling, like someone was upstairs. We would also regularly hear a singular knock on her front door every now and then, as when nobody was there. And also that light that would turn off in our room started turning off whenever we were getting dressed. Our cat started meowing at the ceiling in the laundry room every day, which is between our living room and the garage, and it also shares a wall with our bedroom. In January, I'm home alone with my 2 kids, S, a 10-year-old male, and E, a 6-year-old female. Back this up. Your son is 10 years old and you are 25. Alrighty then. Moving on. We were on the couch, which is on the opposite wall of our TV, when the TV was off. My son was telling my daughter and I a joke when suddenly, in the middle of it, the TV remote moved on the TV stand. It knocked over a Harry Potter wand to the ground. Our cats were asleep on the couch with us. It was unexplainable and freaked me out. The worst event was in March, during spring break. I had my niece, R, a 6-year-old female, over spending the night. And her and my daughter E were in the garage, which we've converted to a playroom. They were playing games. I was on the couch inside the living room. My girlfriend was outside smoking. My son was at his grandma's house. Suddenly I heard my daughter yell, "Yeah?" I didn't respond because I didn't say anything to her, so I thought she was talking to R. Then my daughter and niece both ran into the room and asked what I needed because they heard somebody call to them. My niece said it sounded like my mom. From her perspective, you know. I told them I didn't say anything. Nobody said anything, and they both explained to me that they definitely heard someone say both of their names, and to tell them to come here. They said it sounded like a whisper, but they were convinced it was my sister's voice, R's mom. I immediately called my sister and explained this to her because I was shocked, and these 2 little girls were both so sure of what they heard and were so scared that they wouldn't go back into the garage, or even go to get their shoes and toys. This is not the first time these girls have talked to the paranormal, unfortunately. My sister and I moved very close to each other in 2021, and I moved into my house first. The girls were 2 at the time, and my daughter didn't speak for the first 3 years of her life. But I caught her on the baby monitor talking to her ceiling in babble talk almost nightly. My niece spoke perfect words, and when they moved into their house, I watched my niece at my house while they moved their things in. A few days later, my niece told my sister and I that the demon that lives in my house came with her home to her new house. She explained that he got into the car with her and came home with her. This whole thing freaks me out. I got summoned to purgatory last night as a guide. I don't normally dream. I usually go to sleep and wake up with no recollection of any dream whatsoever. Occasionally I'll get a nonsensical dream about my daily experiences. Last night was different. My dream was so vivid and cohesive, and I truly felt like I was serving a purpose there. I was brought to purgatory to be a guide to people that had trials there. All of these people were attempting suicide or on the brink of suicide. They were between life and death and were faced with different trials. If they passed their specific trial, they got a second chance at life. If they failed, then they passed on. My job was to give hints to them about how to pass their test. They had to realize what in their life could help them out of their situation. I was able to save 2 people, but I lost 1. The first person I helped was a teenage girl. Her specific trial was an obstacle course set in a bog type of thing. The water wasn't water, but was a slime that could cling to your skin, slow you down if you touched it. She was being chased by a shadowy being. Her only goal was to not be caught. I was helping her, though, and this going over and over again until she realized that she was able to face the monster with the help of her friends. She woke up from her attempt in her bathtub with a pill bottle in her lap. She'd tried to OD, but earned her second chance at life. I could only speculate, but the monster was either her mom or bullies at school. I think it uttered the phrase, "commit to gun mouth," at one point, making me think bullies. Never heard that sentence in my life. The second person was a man, mid-30s, and very obviously had a manual labor job by his build. He was digging in a mine, but kept getting buried by cave-ins. In this one, I told an anecdotal story about how family is one of the pillars of healthy life, and he was able to realize that he could use his family, spirituality, and other aspects of his life to lean on, just to kind of help him out of the trouble. In his case, for everything he realized, he could rely on it, physically manifested as a pillar to help hold up the mine. The strongest being his wife and daughter. She was about 3 and cute as a button. He woke up in his recliner with an empty bottle of Jack at his feet and a revolver in his hand. He cried for a bit and he went to hold his family, and I'm guessing his trial represented all the things in his life he was trying to deal with and felt overwhelmed. The last guy in the room was suffocating. Literally darkness. I was there trying to get him to realize that even the smallest of things could be the light of your life. He had a tuxedo cat that adored him. He was supposed to realize that even small things could light up his darkness and provide warmth. Would have literally spawned a light, then he could see the way out. But he didn't listen. The darkness got him and snuffed him out. I saw him jump off the top of a building, and he passed on. His trial was supposed to represent his struggle with depression. Well, pretty sure anyways. It was a surreal experience to have something like that. And if you were one of the people that I helped above, well, keep it up and I believe in you. It's been a year. A little backstory. I've always been a bit sensitive when it comes to paranormal things, but mainly it's dreams. Over the last year, I've become scared to walk around the house at 3 a.m. I know it sounds cliche, but that's when most of it starts and ends at 4 a.m. My family moved into the home 7 years ago, and within the past year, I've had the most encounters ever. Nothing harmful has happened, but it's more of a "I'm here" type of thing. It first started when both me and my husband heard something talking. Nothing was on, and we assumed it was one of the kiddos' iPads. We went back to sleep and were wakened by a loud boom, assuming something fell. Ow. There was nothing. So it's been months at this point. I have an art studio downstairs, not fully a basement due to the design, but I take a break to use the half bath. Out of habit, I close the door. Then I heard 3 knocks at the door. Assuming it was somebody, I opened it quickly. Nothing was there and everyone was asleep. Maybe I shouldn't have opened it. And my house was built in the 70s, so you can hear creaks on both sets of stairs. No evidence because you would have to run fairly quickly. Weeks later, you can hear voices and sounds like 2 people are talking, but not loud enough for you to make out what they're saying. When approaching, it goes away, and again, nothing that could have done that. My husband said it sounds like a video game playing on an iPad. You can hear it, but not make it out. No iPad or electronics were on to even play something. My son has heard the man as well. I've had small things go back and forth, like an unplugged wire or a single leaf on a fake plant. And this week, Monday actually, 3 a.m., my senior dog began walking back and forth on the ottoman, like he's following something. He usually jumps on it when he's playing or excited. No tail wag, just going from end to end and calling his name. Still did it, so I decided to get up and let him out, and he didn't potty, so we went back in. He then laid with me, and by that time it was close to 4 a.m. I'm not sure who or what it is and why, and I believe it's a man and a woman. I sense a woman, while the man is only felt when they're talking to each other. My husband's childhood home was haunted, but he chose to ignore it. I can't. I don't want to make things worse, but it does freak me out at times. Whispers in the Pillow. This is a story my friend told me. Something his mother went through when she was still very young. I'll tell it the way that he shared it with me. When my mom was about 19, long before I was born, she had a tiring job working at a busy clothing store in the city. Every morning she'd take 2 buses to get there, and by the time she returned home, her shoulders would feel like they were carrying rocks. She soaked in warm baths, used herbal patches, and even had her best friend crack her back. Nothing truly helped. Finally, decided to visit a chiropractor near the station. Throughout the session, the chiropractor made small remarks like, "This muscle's been tight for a long time," or, "You must stand lopsided when you walk." My mother smiled politely, though she was growing a little tired of his observations. Then out of nowhere he said, "Your pillow doesn't suit you." She froze. Growing up, she never had a proper pillow, just bundled up t-shirts or folded towels under her head. And even at that age, she used the same habit. And hearing that from a stranger made her feel strangely exposed. That night, she decided to buy a real pillow. At the store, the down pillows were too expensive. Soft cotton ones didn't feel right. And then she noticed something a little bit unusual. A firm pillow filled with buckwheat husks made a faint rustling sound when she pressed it. She liked how she could shape it under her neck, and she brought it home. The first night she slept on it, she sank into the kind of sleep she hadn't felt in years. She woke up late the next morning, something she almost never did. A week later, her coworker noticed how rested she looked and asked why. My mom told her about the pillow, and that coworker bought the exact same one. Not long after, coworker began oversleeping too, so much that she started arriving late to work every other day. At first, my mom thought it was just a coincidence, but then she too found herself dozing off during lunch breaks, barely able to keep her eyes open in the evenings. Her own mother started to worry. "You've been sleeping too much lately," she said. Half asleep, my mom mumbled something back and pressed her cheek against the pillow. That's when she felt it for the first time, a strange faint breath of cold air against her skin. She sat up fully awake. Heaviness vanished in an instant, leaving only a cold prickling along her spine. Without thinking, she grabbed a pair of scissors and tore open the pillow seam. Buckwheat husks poured out in a soft wave, but mixed in the filling with something else. A dark reddish stain that soaked through the inner fabric. And there was a small curled Polaroid photo. It showed a middle-aged man standing in what looked like a foggy forest. He was waving at the camera with his face blurry. But that wasn't the worst part. Along with the photo, there were several strands of coarse black hair. They were stuck together with something that looked disturbingly like dried blood. And inside the lining of the pillow were 4 faint, dragged finger marks, as if somebody had clawed their way out. My grandmother screamed. She immediately sprinkled holy water around the room, whispering prayers under her breath. They stuffed the husks, the photo, and the hair into a trash bag and rushed to the nearest church. The priest went pale when he saw the contents, then quietly began a cleansing prayer. The next day, my mother told her coworker what happened. The woman raced home to check her own pillow. Inside, she found another photo. This time, a man on a pier waving. The 2 long finger marks inside the fabric and the hair was different and thinner, but the dark stains were the same. When they reported it to the bedding manager, he simply said, "Oh, only had a few of those in stock, all sold out." No one believed them. Supplier was just a regular company. No explanation and no follow-up. And the other 3 pillows were never found. My mom never bought another buckwheat pillow after that. And even then, when she tells the story, she always ends it the same way. The man in the photo looked like he was waving at someone just behind the camera. Who was taking the picture? It certainly wasn't me. Or whoever's voices come on in after me. I don't even know what's going on anymore. But from the silent abyss of curiosity, I bid you farewell. Sweet dreams. See ya.
Greetings, seekers of the uncharted from Paranormal M. Join us on an adventure into the inexplicable. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications to be part of our latest enigmatic tales. Happy exploring. So this happened when my sister and I were in high school. We rented out this semi-detached house for a few years with our mom, dad, and 8-year-old brother at the time. It was a newish area, and it was a pretty family-friendly neighborhood. Our house always gave me weird vibes in general, but I had no idea why. It was kinda small and the layout was weird. When you walked into the kitchen area from the living room, you had the actual kitchen, the stove, the fridge, the table, all that to the left. Then to the right side of it was carpet, and there was a little electric fireplace that didn't work. Our parents' wedding pictures were hanging on top. We never used that space, so my dad put a Bowflex machine there, which made it even more ugly. Moving on, we bought a dog that year. She would frequently bark in the corner of our room, mine and my sister's. When no one was in there, it was pitch black. When we would go upstairs to see, she would still be barking. It was like a scared, territorial kind of bark. As she barked, she would back up at the same time in fear. It was spooky. But I never saw anything, so I was just kind of whatever about it. I also saw my brother come down the stairs in the morning only to have him be sleeping in his room. Now, what I'm about to write is still unexplainable to this day. Our parents still don't believe us. We were all hanging out in the kitchen, my sister, brother, and I, when suddenly we look on the wall in the weird carpet area, and there was a ginormous spider crawling on it. It was probably tarantula-sized. We lived in Canada, so this is not normal for us. We were both like, "Oh my God, let's take a picture of it because nobody's going to believe us." So my sister whips out her phone, and it won't turn on. Never happened before. So I was like, whatever. I'm going to go upstairs quick and get mine. so I'd jolt up the stairs and come back down quick. As I was coming down, I'd just see the rest of the spider's body as it disappeared behind my parents' wedding picture on the wall. The thing is, we inspected this picture and it was literally flat against the wall. There's no way anything, especially a spider that big, could fit behind it. We were so confused and still are to this day. We've had a few weird experiences afterwards, but nothing crazy after leaving that house. My sister and I shared a weird dream once, and that's kind of where it ended. Ghost preacher and attacking shadow entity. Long story. I was raised in a family that never once dismissed the paranormal. In fact, we all kind of reveled in it. I mean, hell, I remember at 8 years old, my freaking grandma bought me my first ever ghost book. It was called The Everything Ghost Book. So needless to say, I was pretty much always a weird kid. My family had always been superstitious and even quote-unquote sensitive to a point. My mom would always say things like, and this is in quotes, "I have a feeling I'm gonna see quote-unquote person today." And she would always run into them somehow. My first real experiences start 10 years ago when I was just 16 years old. My mom had found a cheap foreclosed house in a ridiculously small town called Ponce de Leon in Missouri, or as I like to call it, Missouri. Naturally, she fell in love with the house. My mom, my older sister, and I moved in not long after. I was homeschooled at this time, and I was not happy about moving to such a small rural area. And when I say small, I mean I could literally walk to the town post office, right around the corner, as well as the town church. Not to mention you had to drive up a few hills to even get cell reception. Although I didn't share my mom's excitement about the move, the quaint town was kind of beautiful. It had a strange little cemetery and many natural springs and waterfalls, as the town name suggests. Upon doing recent research of the town, I found this little blurb on Wiki. And this was how the town got its name, and why people around the town joked about the water's healing powers. The community was founded circa 1875 as a health resort to exploit the mineral spring at the location. The resort was named for the explorer, Juan Ponce de Leon. The resort and town prospered, and with a population of around 1,000, it was the largest town in the county. We soon realized after moving in that the neighbors were pretty close-knit. Upon conversation with one of them, my mom had found out a few things about the house. It was built in the 1950s, and in the 1980s they started to add on to it, and it was turned into a Baptist preacher's parsonage, or a church house provided for a member of the clergy. This is the same preacher that spoke at the church right up the road. It was later sold to the prior buyers, then foreclosed, and that's when we got it. Nothing more was said of what happened to the preacher. Now, pretty much immediately after we moved in, we started to update the house. We did flooring, painting, and all the things that come with buying an older house. We hadn't experienced anything unusual during this time. After we had gotten settled in and all the renovations ceased, I invited my friend over to show her the new house. This is when my first experience happened. I started showing her around the kitchen, the living room, bathrooms. And that was because I was saving my bedroom for last. As soon as I started to push my bedroom door open, we heard an object scrape across the tile of my bedroom directly towards us. I looked all around, and that's when I saw a little LED booklight by my feet. It's important to note that I strictly remember wedging that booklight between two heavy books on my bookshelf the night before. And that bookshelf was at least 12 feet from my bedroom door. I remember my friend's just face looking tense and uneasy as I tried to explain. I even marched over to my bookshelf and tried to understand the logistics of how it could have just even happened. Truthfully, there was no way I could explain it, and frankly, the fact that it was thrown in my direction specifically made me feel super anxious. That event seemed to be the catalyst. Strange things started happening to not only me, but my family as well. When we started opening up about the whole ordeal as a family, all three of us started to realize that we all shared all these experiences. One we all heard when walking down the same hallway was a man's deep voice saying, "Hey," in a rushed, loud tone. Anyone who's heard any kind of voice phenomenon knows that it's so strange because it sounds as though it's directly in your ear canal. It's unlike anything else. Another common occurrence that we shared was in the bathroom at night. When we had to wake up and pee, we all recounted hearing heavy footsteps, almost like a man in boots. Footsteps approaching the closed bathroom door. The steps would stop right outside the bathroom door, and you could bend down and see the shadow of feet underneath the door. Then they would walk away. We also frequently heard the front door opening, only to find that it was fully closed. At one point, my mom, being sensitive as I mentioned earlier, was lying in her bed at night, just about to drift off when she got a strange feeling come over her. She got the image in her head of an older male. She mentioned that he had an angry face and you could just feel this feeling of anger and hostility. I think she came to the assumption that it could have possibly been the preacher, although we have no proof of this. If it was him, I can certainly tell you he did not like me one bit. This is where my story and experiences turn a little bit darker. We had lived in the house for about a year now or so, and the summer started to come around. I decided I wanted my own space and moved out to the separated garage space. It was a huge space that we never kept the cars in anyway. I remember completely making the space my own. I bought huge curtains, painted the cement walls, got a mini fridge, bought a TV, PS2, and most importantly, all my music equipment. I've always been a music lover and devoted a lot of my time to playing electric guitar in my early teens. This is something that followed me. Right about this time is when I found my love for classic rock, but what really intrigued me was its dark history. It had gotten to a point where my mom and sister barely saw me in the house anymore. I had basically become a hermit in the garage, playing music and delving deep into research on my laptop. One figure in classic rock I was particularly engaged in was Jimmy Page of Led Zeppelin. According to a lot of books and articles, he was into the occult and followed English occultist Aleister Crowley. I often found myself falling down a rabbit hole, and I started to feel so disconnected from reality. It was then when I became obsessed with that old idea, the whole sell your soul to the devil and shred like a madman on guitar thing. And one time while practicing, I believe someone or something gave me a small taste of what it would feel like. There was one solo in particular I had tried to play a few times but could never quite hammer down. I had started to practice it again one day and started playing most all the fast-paced solo perfectly, almost without any effort on my part. I all but ripped my guitar strap trying to get my guitar off. It terrified me. Unfortunately, it wasn't enough for me to stop my isolation or research. I didn't touch my guitar for a while, though. My friends that I had then were very like-minded, all very interested in the paranormal, the occult, and otherworldly things. My garage started to be a safe place for all my friends I had, and there were plenty of long nights partying and partaking in things no mom would be proud of. But we were rebellious and pretty defiant teenagers. None of us cared at all at that time. It was around this point I remember almost dreading going into the house when I had to inevitably take a shower or use the bathroom. In a sense, I didn't feel particularly welcome there either. I remember taking a shower one day, listening to Black Sabbath on a nearby iPad. The music kept pausing, so I would reach out and press play again. This happened about 3 more times when I finally yelled, "I know it's you, stop doing that!" And it didn't happen again for the remainder of my shower. It could have been a coincidence, or a technical fault for sure, but I remember being so bold toward what I thought was that old preacher man, almost feeling a hatred towards him. One morning when I was still sleeping in the garage, my mom busted through the door and started to throw all my things around. She was screaming, "I don't know what the fuck is going on here, but something's gotta change. Something's not right." Her voice sounded angry, but I could hear the undertones of fear. Keep in mind, it's not like I had a huge pentagram spray painted on the exterior of the garage. As far as I knew, she had no clue of what I was looking into, and what I had even been experiencing. The intuition of a loving and concerned mother, I guess. So, she proceeded to rip down my posters, grabbed a random item of mine and threw them outside the garage door into the lawn. I remember this like it was yesterday because I think it finally hit me how far things had gone, and seeing my mom so upset and ultimately scared, I think knocked some sense into me. It was then that I also moved back into the house, as it was turning to fall and started to become too cold to stay in that garage overnight anyways. Ultimately, I purged everything I had that truly had any dark personal significance to me during my move back into the house. The last thing that happened, and probably the worst of all, happened to my sister. The only way I heard her story was by listening to her explaining it to my mom. Even though I was completely moved into the house now, my family still kept their distance. I knew they felt something too. I felt as if I really divided my family. My sister had a job that required her to get up early in the morning, and when it was still dark outside. She was smoking a cigarette on the back porch, which had a direct view of the garage and the steep hill that runs alongside the detached garage. She said she saw a dark mass low to the ground. She first spotted it come from behind the back of the garage, and then it started to charge down the steep hill towards the back porch where she was standing. She expressed to my mom that she had never felt so much fear in her life. She quickly shut the back door. She also said that she didn't believe it was an animal because it was charging towards her. There was absolutely no sound, no paws, hooves, or sound of feet on the soft ground. The house seemed to go quiet after that. No voices, no footsteps. Unfortunately, a few years later, my mom could no longer keep up during a harsh winter. Everything started to break and we didn't have the money to repair things. We couldn't even keep the house warm. We decided to up and leave. Most of our belongings were still in the house when we did leave. We came back a few times on warmer days to grab some more of our things and started to see our old home become in a complete state of disrepair. Mold growing absolutely everywhere. Paint starting to peel and all the hard work we had put into it gone. It was harder for my mom to see. It was her first house that she bought, and it killed her to just abandon it. It eventually went back into foreclosure. When I turned 20, I got my first apartment, and it had to be blessed twice. I thought everything had gone back to normal at that point. I then met my now husband when I was still in my first apartment. He had no idea of my dark past and admitted to me that he felt something dark in my apartment. One night it had gotten so bad he said that he had to pray over me. I've had 2 apartments since then, and we both don't sense anything inherently dark. Sometimes I still wonder if it's truly left. I got in contact with a good friend who distanced herself from me during that dark time. I would actually consider her my closest friend. She recounts things very differently and said that I had definitely changed. She has a few stories of her own and things that I have said to her that were very unlike my true character. The crazy thing is, I don't remember saying some of these things. I truly don't think I knew how bad it had gotten. The hooded figure. About 10 years ago, when I was in my early teens, I experienced my first, and so far, only paranormal experience. During the summer when this happened, I was visiting my father in Hungary with my 2 sisters. The night this happened was just like any other night. My grandmother was staying over, and between her, my father, and my sisters, all 3 bedrooms were taken, leaving me to sleep on the sofa in the living room. My sisters and I had just gotten back from a late night of hanging out with some friends, and we decided to get ready for bed, pretty immediately since we were all very tired. As I got into my bed for the night, my sisters continued talking quietly in their room with the door open and the lights from their bedroom on. My father and grandmother were asleep. My father's house wasn't creepy by any means, but the one unnerving thing about sleeping in the living room in the dark was the fact that all 3 doors leading into it had a large panel of frosted, wrinkled glass on the top half. And this allowed you to see fuzzy shapes or figures of people on the other side of the door. This made what I saw all the more mysterious, and at the time, terrifying. Still wide awake, I looked up through the glass of one of the doors, and looking as clear as anything I'd ever seen was a hooded figure staring right at me. Gray and featureless, it was standing on the other side of the door and perfectly backlit by the light streaming out of my sister's room. I immediately froze, unable to take my eyes off of it. The figure was clearly watching me, although it didn't have any eyes or face that I could see. Any defining features were obscured by some type of hood or shawl it wore over its head and shoulders. As I lay there frozen in fear, my mind quickly eliminated all the possibilities of this thing being human. Both my grandmother and my father were asleep, and my sisters were still talking in their bedroom. Not to mention, why would any of my family just stand there, looking at me without moving in the dead of night? After some time, I finally plucked up the courage to call out to one of my sisters to come, unsure of what else to do. She told me she'd be there soon, leaving me staring at this figure for another terrifying period. Then, just seconds before she was about to step out of her room and through the very same door the figure was standing behind, it glided away and out of sight, and my sister walked through as if nothing had even happened. For me, this was the nail in the coffin, so to speak, that I witnessed some type of spirit, ghost, or guardian angel that night. The way in which it glided away on the other side of the glass was so unhuman-like in its movement. I know that what I saw that night was something paranormal. I have the cremation ashes of 4 people in my apartment. Could they be messing with me? About 3 years ago, my beautiful mom passed away. When she did, I got not only her ashes, but my dad's and my mom's dad's as well. Also, last year my mother-in-law plus son-in-law and 2 kids moved in with me and brought the ashes of my father-in-law. Now that we're all caught up on why I have so many dead people in the house, for the past year, every month or 2, I've woken up to something grabbing my toes. At first, I would jump up and go to the end of the bed thinking that it was my daughter, because who else would it be, but no one would be there. After a few times of this happening, I decided that maybe it was my mom, just saying hello, because she used to wake me up by grabbing my toes that way. So I tried not to freak out when it happened, really. But maybe 2 months ago, I was in the kitchen kinda pretty late at night, and I guess somebody left the cupboard open because it was open, and I kid you not, a cup came flying out of the cupboard and nearly hit me. It just flew out. It landed next to my foot. When I told my family what had happened, my son-in-law laughs almost evil-like and says that she thinks S-I-L means son-in-law, no? Onward and upward, anyhow. She thinks that it was her dad messing with me because the cup was covered in pictures of butterflies. And any time they feel that they get a message from him, it had to do with butterflies. So, okay, my father-in-law doesn't like me. Then last night I was laying with my daughter because even though she's 10 years old, I still put her to bed at night. I dozed off for an hour or two. Then I just woke up for no apparent reason. Then the covers pulled up my leg crazy fast and something grabbed a hold of my foot. I was wide awake and not just felt but saw the covers move. I jumped up so fast I don't even know how I got my arm out from underneath my daughter's head. The thing or ghost or whatever grabbed my foot wasn't cold like I would think a ghost might be though. It was just like room temperature. What's going on here? This doesn't happen to any of the other 6 people in my house, people in caps. Just me, why? Is it my mom grabbing my toes and my foot? My father-in-law throwing a cup at me? Or could it be something else altogether? And, most importantly, should I be scared? One too many experiences. My family and I moved countries when I was young, and the first house we moved to in that country was about 40 years old, owned by a young guy. I can't tell you where, but it's one of the Commonwealth countries. The reason for not disclosing the location is because I want this to remain somewhat anonymous. But I know that people who I've told this story may know who I am. It was a rented property, and nothing out of the ordinary other than multiple neighborhood cats roaming around in the dying garden with very much dead lawn. When we moved in, we were fine for a few weeks, and then it started. I had a really good relationship with my family, until we moved into that house. Everyone started to pick fights with each other, and when we were living there, nothing ever was going right. Everyone was on edge, the vibe was off. I sometimes saw pearly dusts floating above me at night while laying down on bed. I reasoned it as cars passing by, producing that reflection on the walls or something. But it was still there, even after the cars passed by in the street. I didn't think much of it at the time, and as a kid I just thought we moved to a dusty old house. Then the house would randomly get cold, and when it did, it would never get warm despite the 3 portable heaters in the same room. And scarily enough, they were all functioning fine. And where it would get cold in the house would vary every time. At the time, we just thought that the construction of the house was old and maybe we had thin walls or the heaters were all defective. Then one day I saw it. Before I get into details, I want you to imagine this corridor right in the middle of the house surrounded by bedrooms and bathrooms. Basically, this corridor had no natural light, and it was very, very dark if all the bedroom doors were closed. Going back to this encounter, I was in the bathroom washing my hands, and as I opened the bathroom door to exit, I see this fog. And this fog resembles a human arm moving back and forth as if it was walking. It disappeared at the end of the corridor, a full arm stretching from shoulder to the tips of the fingers, moving as though attached to an invisible body, resembling a brisk walk in that dark corridor. It couldn't have been some light coming outside from the windows, because it was in the corridor that did not have any natural light available. Plus, it was daytime. Only after this encounter I felt the shiver down my back, a genuine shiver that you get when you see something that you can't logically process. I didn't share these encounters with my family back then, because I didn't want to scare anyone, and I was in doubt with the experience. When we found a new place and moved out of that house, I finally felt ready to share this experience with my family, jokingly saying that the house was haunted. I only got to know then that everyone had the same experience, seeing something in the air, nightmares, a ghastly arm, cold spots. My mom would have nightmares of this black shadow trying to enter into the house while she would hold them back out. My sibling, who also saw the arm, told me that while the arm was moving away, exactly the same way I've described above, he swears that the temperature in that corridor must have dropped in that moment as he could see his own breath. I feel like this whole thing could be explained due to stress of moving to a new country. I don't know. I'm just thankful that we were only renting it out temporarily and that we were able to leave. From guardians to unwanted guests. I grew up as a mixed-race, mixed-culture child. My mother being a black female and my father a Native American. Traditionally, natives are very in tune with the spiritual world. My mom, not so much. Mostly holding that good old Christian belief system, and often referring to my dad's spiritualism as his quote-unquote crazy native beliefs. However, I've always connected to ghostly entities, and keep quiet for the most part, not wanting my mother to refer to me the same way as him. I often called these entities my guardians when I was a child, because whenever I did something stupid or unsafe, they, or some of them, would protect me. So I literally grew up not fearing the supernatural. Now, so you can understand why I'm so comfortable as a child, I'll elaborate a little on my interactions. I was a latchkey kid. So after school, I would walk home, lock myself into the house, and then went about my day, feeding myself, doing my homework, and watching TV. It wasn't uncommon for an elderly woman's spirit to often sit down on the couch with me until my Nana, my grandmother, got home from work. It wasn't until my teen years that I realized that the elderly woman was my great-grandmother who had passed away 6 years before my birth. Throughout my lifetime, I've interacted with many spirits. Most stuck in a loop. A couple I could interact with, and the one that still terrifies me to this day. I had just finished my senior year of high school, and I had applied to a local community college. I was one of those students who balanced between poor enough to file for financial aid, but wealthy enough that I didn't get much. Not enough to pay for all my classes and books. So, I started house-sitting our family and friends' animals to pay the rest. My mother's previous boss was one of those people. She loved traveling and would often do, this about 2 or 3 times a year for at least a month. She was retired at the time. She lived in a rural area, with one neighbor close enough to contact just in case of emergency. I had been to the house twice before when I was a child, and both times I was unsettled. My mother's boss, let's just call her Amy, was a teenager during World War II, and was placed in danger because of her parents' open objection to Hitler. So, they fled to America. She's a photographer in her spare time, and she adores Mexico, and at the time was looking to move there. And with that said, she had hundreds of masks hanging on her walls, all throughout her house, accompanied with photos that she took of cemeteries and gravestones. For a couple of years, I experienced small things and voices, dragging noises. Periodically, things would have been moved. Nothing too terrifying, but when I started dating an old friend, I had him staying with me just to have an immediate backup, if something were to happen. When this happened, I was 21. My boyfriend had expressed some discomfort in being in the house, especially at night, to which I told him about the multiple spirits I'd encountered there. I mentioned that none of them had been hostile, and as long as we left them alone, they would leave us alone, with the exception of the screaming man. He liked to stand outside of the window and scream around 3 in the morning. and I simply would ask him to quiet down. We were playing games on the second week of our stay. When my significant other had to use the bathroom, I opted to change into my jammies while he went off into the darkness. When he screamed very loudly. Now, my significant other isn't easily scared, but he hightailed it back into the living room. He said that the dark entity that often stood beside the homeowner's bedroom door, which happened to also be next to the hall that led into the house from the cars, had turned and looked at him. It paused before getting bigger and started running towards him. Very strange behavior for the being, but I assumed that we had upset it, so I apologized for bothering it. From then on, my significant other and I went to the bathroom together during the night. Fast forwarding to last week, things had gotten a bit tenser. Each entity started getting more and more agitated, until it seemed like our nights were filled with activity, and our space seemed to shrink until it was the single bedroom. I kept my keys on the coffee table in the living room, my computer for school in the family room, and a few toiletries. Those objects would appear back in my bedroom, as if someone carelessly tossed them in. Spirits I had no problems with started running away or charging at me. Eventually, I took my significant other home to see if things slowed down. They didn't. By the time my 2-month house-sitting job was done, I was exhausted and cranky. I left the house at 10 at night, being that the family would be back around 4 in the morning. And during the long drive on the dirt road, a childlike figure slowly walked across. I paused, seeing the same dark shadow that guarded the entrance to the home, and watched as it ran across the road, taking the child figure away with it. After a second, I continued on my way home, not wanting to slow to a stop, or leave the vehicle to investigate. 4 days afterwards, I was chilling at my house, finishing up my finals. My grandmother, who was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and a dog were in the bedroom behind me. My grandfather was at his aunt's funeral in Bermuda, and my mom was in California for business. I say this because I need you to understand I was essentially alone and the only one awake. The sounds of someone dropping and dragging a large box echoed from down the hall. My grandparents have an ensuite bedroom. They had their own living room space, where I was doing my homework, a bathroom, a closet, and a bedroom that hid behind a door, one that was closed. I paused in my essay, suddenly feeling the familiar unease that I associated with Amy's house. The dragging sounds never left. What I assumed was my kitchen, and I by no means went to investigate. But I had never had a spirit follow me home, and that night I didn't sleep because that spirit didn't wish me well. When I did come out in the morning, I found my house-sitting bag torn open with all my house-sitting gear tossed about. It's safe to say I never house-sat for Amy again, and I hadn't experienced anything outside of the norm of what goes on at my house since. But there have been points that I can feel the hairs on my arms raise like I'm being watched when I'm at other houses. I played with my dead grandfather in my dreams as a child. So I never knew my grandfather. He passed away 2 months before I was born. He died in November of '96, and I was born in January of '97. And I'm the only grandchild that he didn't get to meet in person. So growing up, I always knew who he was, and I always assumed it's because I was told who he was when I was little, until I was 15. So I'm at a hospital visiting someone who just had a baby, and somehow the topic of dead relatives visiting people in dreams comes up. My mother proceeds to tell a story of when my grandfather visited me when I was little. I got so emotional at 15 I had to leave the room, and the hospital entirely to collect myself after the story was told. The story goes like this, as my mother told it. I was playing in the living room one day while my grandma was looking at photo albums. I was maybe 3 at the time, and I walked over to my grandma as she's looking at a picture of her late husband, and I say, "That's the man that plays with me in my dreams." My grandmother responds, "What?" I continue to repeat what I said before, but I add, "Before he leaves, he kisses me right here and tells me to be good." I gesture to the middle of my forehead in between my eyebrows. This is where my grandfather kissed all of his grandkids before telling them bye. Something I would have never known unless I was told or experienced it myself. My grandmother freaks out and calls my mom at work and asks her if she'd ever mentioned Herman, my grandpa, to me. My mother responds no and says, "The only thing I've told him is that Daddy is his guardian angel and he'll always look after him. And I told him that the day that he was born." My grandma proceeds to tell my mom to come home, so she does. Once my mom arrives home, my grandma pulls up to her side and asks her a bunch of questions, then brings her into the living room where I'm just doing 3-year-old things. She then pulls me over and says, "Tell Mommy what you told me about this man," as she points to the picture of my grandpa, and I respond, "That's the old man that plays with me in my dreams. Before he leaves, he kissed me right here." I gesture to the middle of my forehead between my eyebrows once more. My mother and grandmother are now both freaking out as I continue to play with my toys. That's where the story ends. As far as I've been told, my mom never mentioned to me who my grandfather was other than that what she told me when I was born. I've always known who he was and that he had this weird connection with me. I guess since he never got to meet me, he made up for it in this way. He's the reason for my obsession with music. He was a traveling bluegrass musician in Kentucky. I was raised hearing stories of him singing and playing guitar. I've idolized him my entire life, so that story was very emotional for me to hear. A haunting at a fire department, or faulty pipes. This all happened when I was a kid. I'm 23 now and it still gives me chills. Okay, so I'll jump right into it. Both of my parents were volunteer firefighters, and I practically grew up in a fire station around all sorts of first responders. This fire station was connected to one of the county police department offices, which was a small 4-room office upstairs with 2 entrances, a door that led outside, and another that led downstairs to the bay where the fire trucks were. Everything seemed normal and fine, until a friend of my cousin and my cousin's husband, an EMT, used a Ouija board to try to talk to an officer that had just died a week before. So let me give you a rundown on this cop real quick before I get into the paranormal stuff that started happening after his death and the Ouija board use. So from what I remember of him, which isn't a lot, he was a pretty crooked cop. He would arrest people in the small town for drug possession. Then he would give the drugs to his son after they'd been processed into the system and counted, so his son could sell them and they'd split the profit. Nasty. This goes on for years, and there's rumors but no proof of who was stealing the drugs, until he died. This officer had a surgery and was taking stolen pain meds and accidentally OD'd. They found his body and a large amount of stolen drugs in his home. So now on to the paranormal. So my cousin told me about them using the Ouija board there. This officer's death was recent, so them doing this to talk to him, well, to me, a kid who loved horror movies, was super cool and fascinating. The one key detail I do remember from the story that my cousin told me was that they asked the spirit who was there, and the spirit whispered to the officer and told him his name into his ear. For a while, I thought my cousin was messing with me to scare me, until a few months later I had an experience there. So I was about 10 when this happened, maybe 12 the oldest. I used to go work out with my parents at the fire station because I was a chunky kid, and the family doctor rode my parents' ass to get me to lose weight. Well, one night we had finished working out, my parents get a towed to the firehouse, and my mom agreed to stay there with me until my dad got back. So we're sitting there watching old training VHS tapes on the TV in the dark, and we hear loud stomping upstairs. My mom and I immediately froze and looked at each other, because we thought it was just us there, and we're pretty sure it is just us. It was bizarre. The stomping would start in one room, then stomp to the other. Filing cabinets would open and slam, doors would open and slam, almost as if it was looking for something. Then the stomping got to the middle of the room and stopped. It was so quiet you could hear a needle drop. The way this fire station was set up, there was a ramp that went down to the bay where the trucks were, so my mom and I are sitting there in silence, just listening, when we hear the door to the bay open and someone walking up the ramp. My mom got up, went to open that door that looked out into the hallway at the ramp, and nothing was there, not a soul. But as clear as day, we heard a person walking up that ramp. Moments after that, every sink in the downstairs bathroom turned on, all 8 of them. And I know someone will say that it could be faulty pipes, but do faulty pipes turn all the knobs on the sink? I don't think so. This all took place in the span of 10 or 15 minutes, too. We turned off the sinks, and shortly after, maybe 15 or 20 minutes, my dad and all the other firefighters piled into the fire station. My mom and I told my dad and everyone else what was happening, but what do you know, they didn't believe us. They told us we were making it up and we were hearing things. Ever since the Ouija board was used there, the feeling of that place is just weird and creepy, where before it seemed very familiar and welcoming, like a place of safety. My experience with premonitions. I'm 27 and I've been experiencing significant experiences and premonitions since about 5 years old. Although my earliest vivid memory of a weird experience is when I was 8. When I was 5 or 6, I just feel like I had really weird dreams. Something happened around that age range for me, but I don't know what. Age 8. Simply, I had a dream where a regular day happened, and then that day repeats itself. I always had a hard time getting up in the morning, so my mom yelled from a different room that I need to get up. I wasn't getting up. Then my grandmother helped me up so my mom wouldn't get too upset with me. I finally sit up, slowly waking up and still dazed. So, we lived in a 2-bedroom apartment. It was me, my mom, and my grandma. My bed was in my grandmother's room, since it could fit 2 beds, while my mom had her own, yet smaller room. I have to walk past my mom's room to get to the living room, and while walking past, my grandmother says something to me. I can't remember what exactly, and so did my mom. Fast forward to school now. I can't remember specifics about the day, but the key part is that our class was especially loud and talkative, which annoyed our teacher. So we were threatened with recess being lost if we kept being loud. She walked out of the class to handle something in school, and so we had at it. We started off at a good volume, but over time, it got kind of ridiculous, and the teacher came back saying that she would hear us from the hallway. Door was closed. And we lost recess. Day ends, back home, and sleep. And then I wake up and the same exact thing started happening. Once my mom yelled at me again the same way in the morning and my grandmother helping me up. I started to notice the patterns, except the moment I had a clear memory of the whole day. So when I walked past my mom's room, I said what my grandmother was going to say, and she looked at me like, "How did you know?" I shrugged my shoulders in confusion. I wanted to tell her and now wish I did, but I wanted to see if the day was going to end up like my dream. Despite that small moment, everything proceeded as I saw in the dream. So, cue my mom appearing and I complete her words too. She was also surprised, but again, I just make it seem like I'm being weird and ignore their questions. Now at school, and I'm for sure living the same day again. I spend most of the class finishing everyone's sentences at times, but no one took any real notice. When the teacher left the room again, I told the class to shut the fuck up, or else we'll lose recess. I don't know, a lone 8-year-old kid convinced a class of 23 plus kids to shut up. Better than most teachers, but it happened. I did it just in time because around 5 minutes later, the teacher walked in and praised us for being quiet. Because she could hear us down the hall at first, but then got quiet as if she knew, or as if we knew that she was coming. From there, the day was completely different because we had recess. Ever since then, I'm always having a fear that I would wake up at that same age again, making this all a dream. Thanks, 2020. Age 10. This was my first time having premonitions while awake. I can't remember when exactly, but I know it was spring or summer solstice because I was still in school as this happened during aftercare. I attended a private school that had aftercare where we could play outside or stay in the auditorium or cafeteria room until our parents picked us up. Anyway, it was hot that day and all of us kids are just kicking it. My friends and I are all in the swing that are just facing the that faces the blacktop, where we all usually played board games like dodgeball and all that. There were some kids playing soccer and all of a sudden I had a vision exactly like That's So Raven, where I stared blankly and I see what was going to happen with a bright yellow glow in a vignette. And then it went away and I come back to reality. My friends noticed what happened and was asking me what I was looking at. I point to a kid running with the ball and say, "He's gonna fall in 3, 2, 1, and then he fell and flipped over. My friends lose their shit and ask me how I just did that. Of course, it just happened and I'm just as confused. I had a total of 5 visions that day, but only remember 3. The other one was seeing my friends sitting on the playground, trucks getting chased by bees. Specifically, I see my friends on the trucks and one of them yells, "Nothing's happening!" And then they get attacked by bees from a bush. Once again, for this vision, it's happening randomly, but this time I didn't know when it would happen. My friends were all into my vision, so I told her what I saw. So they ran up to the trucks and sat and climbed on them. A couple of minutes go by, and then one of the girls says, "Nothing's happening." And then they get bombarded by bees. At that point, we're all convinced that I can see into the future. Last vision was seeing the earth blow up. If it helps, all my vision I had were from my perspective of where I see it, not any other angle. So if it is true, I guess I'll be in a space watching the planet explode. Then again, 3 of the 5 visions came true if I'm correct. I definitely know because I can recall feeling disappointed that not all my visions were accurate. Age 14, which is now. Since around 14, I would have random premonitions strictly in my dreams, and it would be for mundane things like a lunchbox falling on my face when I open a cabinet, or having a specific conversation when walking into a theater. I've become able to discern my deja vus when I experience them because I would intentionally try and remember when it came from a dream or a sequence, and it was actually repeating itself perfectly. And other times, I just sometimes know when something's going to happen, and thus I predicted a lot of personal events or read people perfectly, even though I don't know them. I may have seen a spirit too. Oh, and some kind of winged demon like flying in the sky, but overall premonitions have been the most consistent phenomenon I've experienced throughout my life thus far. My late dad was an exorcist. Discussion. Technically, exorcisms are rituals done by ordained priests, but they did exorcisms with priests, deliverance rituals if without a priest, visited haunted places for research, etc. We had a storage collection of occult items, cases being documented and reviewed by their ministry. They guested in schools, institutions, prisons, talking about the importance of spiritual warfare. My dad also had a meeting with the late Pope John Paul II in Rome back in the early 2000s and appeared in local media from time to time. They also did pilgrimage, local and international, alongside talks focusing on spiritual warfare. I have tons of photos to support this. He was like the Warrens and John Constantine combined. So I'll be focusing on my perspective growing up in a very religious family. A life filled with preternatural and supernatural events, which also might have led to my father's demise, as per the team of chief exorcist of our archdiocese who handled my dad's case in the end. I'll be going back to some history first, as documented by his ministry in the accounts of my uncles and auntie. He grew up with some abilities, as simple as turning the TV on and off using his mind, to being an experienced practitioner of astral projection. With astral projection, he was even able to help the military to locate a plane crash by giving exact coordinates in a rural mountain region here, and identified the bodies by directly speaking with the victims. No survivors, since he worked for that airline too. With those abilities, a group of cultists, in air quotes, was able to locate and identify my dad, through astral projection as well. Insane. They went to our house and tried to recruit him. He was open arms with them until he felt so much negative energy emanating from these people. He drove them away and he felt he was starting to get possessed and tried to run over our maid with the car. Now, coincidentally, his priest friend came by and he was supposed to be a priest but left the seminary when my grandpa died to take care of my grandma, just to visit him and witnessed my dad's possession and exorcised him. This is when his spiritual path started. After his friend priest left, he had a vision of the roof opening up to the sky and saw Saint Michael the Archangel, an intense light. He drew his sword and reached out to him. My mom and our maid witnessed this, and all were dumbfounded. This happened in the early 1990s. He went soul-searching for 40 days and nights. A holy mountain is where he went, Mount Banahaw, where he met different personalities. Fast forward, all possession cases that our parish, the National Shrine, receives were being led straight to our house. Not just that, local and international cases happened as well that my dad handled in the years that came. Growing up, we were taught to pray exorcism prayers and the rosary, all in Latin since we're susceptible to attacks given my dad's exposure. It was a common occurrence to wake up in the middle of the night to pee and hear someone screaming at our garage where the cases were being handled, and would just tell myself, "Here we go again." Our house also became a gateway for spirits. Given the exposure of my dad to these entities, a lot really latched to him, good and bad, and also shared a good number of personal paranormal experiences with them. My dad passed away back in 2007 due to kidney cancer. He only had 4 months to live after being diagnosed, from being normal to his passing. Many ruled out that it was spiritual warfare, because when my dad was already bedridden, paranormal shit came by storm and was the worst. 5 demonic entities were in the house, handled by the team of the chief exorcist of Manila. It was crazy. When my dad was also in the ICU, he practiced deliverance on a fellow comatose patient due to an entity harassing this patient in the hospital. I have so many stories to tell. Specific cases and personal experiences being the son of this man. Though when he passed, everything died down. Paranormal and preternatural experiences happen from time to time, but not as often as when it did when my dad was still alive. I'm now an agnostic for personal reasons, but demons are real. Late one night, a little girl appeared behind me and my friend. It was terrifying. I think she might have turned into a dog, too. This occurred when I was 11 or 12. I'm 28 now. I was staying the night at my friend Danny's house, who lived just a few houses down from mine. There was a large pond behind our neighborhood, and we spent a lot of time there growing up. We'd go fishing, ride bikes, explore the small forest, but we really enjoyed catching turtles and tree frogs. Might sound weird, but what can I say? We had somewhat of an obsession with reptiles and amphibians. Another thing I should note is that there was an old Native American trail that went through all the backyards on our street. I wasn't the Trail of Tears, but it was related to it in some way. I don't really remember. Back to the story. I was up late playing video games with Danny, and after a while he wanted to do something else. It was close to midnight, but we decided to go out and try catching some tree frogs. A family that lived in a nearby house had gone on vacation, and they had a perfect backyard for catching frogs. We hopped their fence and started exploring. Almost immediately, I started getting a weird feeling. I had the feeling that we were being watched or something was nearby, and there was this odd energy in the air. I don't know how to explain it, but something just felt off. I remember feeling afraid, but I had no reason to be. We had done this kind of thing many times before, and it's never inspired fear. About 10 minutes in, we thought we heard the frog saying, "Help me," in a croaky, froggy voice over and over again. The weird thing is, we couldn't see any tree frogs with our flashlights, and the yard wasn't that big. They started chanting in unison, and that made it much louder, feeling more than a little creeped out. We bolted out of there and went back to the street. Now, we were standing under a streetlight on the street corner across from where the frog house was. I looked up at the light and noticed at least 15 dragonflies attached to each other like a human centipede. They were doing a spiraling motion as they flew closer and closer to the light. It was weird. So we heard and saw two unusual things, but you could possibly explain them away. What happened next, however, made absolutely zero fucking sense. After the dragonflies did their thing and flew away, Danny and I remained standing under that streetlight. We began talking about the strangeness of the frogs in particular. We both heard them croaking the same phrase, and we were pretty much just saying, "What the fuck was that about?" At some point during the conversation, I was instantly overcome with the most intense adrenaline rush I've had in my entire life. That feeling of fear without a source while at the frog house was back, but much, much stronger. It was like my fight or flight response was signaled for no reason. Once again, everything felt off, and it felt like there was an intense energy all around us, making the air heavy. I was terrified, and I found out later that my buddy was feeling the same thing. I became as still as possible, listening intently to my surroundings. I didn't hear anything unusual, but I suddenly began to feel drawn to look at the street behind me. I knew something was there. Whatever was behind me was the source of my fear, and it was putting out overwhelming energy with its presence alone. I hesitantly turned around and looked. I have full body goosebumps just recalling this. In the middle of the street, about 20 yards away from us, there was an ordinary-looking 5 to 7-year-old girl with long, dark black hair, wearing a white nightgown. She was sitting Indian-style on the street pavement with a doll in her lap, and she was combing the doll's hair with a hairbrush. I was pretty much terrified beyond imagination. I was frozen with fear. I could barely think straight. There was an incredible amount of energy in the air, and I knew something wasn't natural. She looked innocent enough, but I felt like she could snap me in half with the snap of her fingers if she wanted to. Another creepy detail was that she never even looked at us. She kept her head down and focused on her doll, but she definitely knew that we were there watching her. After what felt like an hour, which realistically was probably 15 or 30 seconds, a car turned onto the street and began heading down the hill towards the girl. I remember the headlights getting brighter and brighter as it approached her. You would think maybe I would try to save her real quick, but I legitimately couldn't move. Also, I didn't really expect her to get hit for some reason. I never felt like she was in any sort of danger. Eventually, she became lost in the car's headlights, never looking up from her doll this whole time, by the way. The car just passed right through without any sound of a collision. It stopped at the stop sign 15 feet from us and made a right turn. We took our eyes off of where the girl was as we watched the car turn. When we looked back to where the girl had been, she was gone. Instead, there was a dog on the sidewalk precisely parallel to where the girl was sitting in the street. The dog was looking right at me when I noticed it, almost like it was waiting for me to see it. Then it just turned around and trotted up the hill in the other direction. After a few seconds, the shock wore off and we sprinted back to Danny's house and spent half the night looking out a second-story window toward the street. I don't know what I saw, but Danny saw the exact same thing. I've always felt like there was a reason it happened for some reason, or a reason it showed itself, whatever it was, to us and all people. Last thing, the house in front of where the girl was seen was haunted. I lived on that street for 10 years, and 4 to 5 different families lived in that haunted house during those 10 years. All of them said it was haunted. I have a couple of stories about that too, but this is already way longer than I wanted it to be. Long update. Talk to friend. Stuff in the woods. Something completely took over the sky during my graduation party, and either everyone is denying it, or no one remembers. I finally got in touch with one of my friends and asked her to remember my graduation party as hard as she could. Before I talked about the event, she remembered it down to the overcast weather, but didn't remember the actual sound itself until I mentioned it. I tried to transcribe her exact words as best as I could while she told me. Yeah, wait, I vaguely remember something like that. I remember a really loud noise like a plane landing, and everyone just being like, "What the fuck was that? Holy shit." Kind of looking at each other. Then afterwards brushing it off as a plane since no one knew what it was. But we all looked, and I don't remember seeing anything outside. It shook the entire house down to the nails in the floorboards, though. Everything was rattling like crazy. That same year, 2012, in mid-July, I heard loud bangs coming from the sky late at night. I know it wasn't thunder because it wasn't raining and it wasn't even humid out and hadn't been all day. It definitely didn't sound like thunder either. You know the sound of a dumpster getting slammed back down after it's lifted by a fork truck? It was like that loud, but sounding like it was coming from a small area, directly in front of my neighbor's house. I saw flashes of light right afterwards. It was loud enough that I asked my mom if she had called the neighbors, but she hadn't heard a thing from inside the house. So yeah, that's what my friend said. In my other post, I read that someone else from Eugene, Oregon, the opposite coast as me, I'm in the Northeast U.S., experienced similar events later that year in December 2012. A lot of people were suggesting covert government military activity. LRAD and Gabriel's trumpet were amongst a few mentions. Many also reported a general unsettling, insidious feeling throughout the beyond of 2012. My thoughts on that are as follows. Could this be government or military activity? I live near a small military base that's used as a weather station and for the local CAP program, pretty much the Air Force ROTC for those unfamiliar. Nothing other than small 2 to 4 passenger Cessna planes or the occasional helicopter ever takes off from there. It simply isn't large enough, and I've personally jogged the entire perimeter. Was in CAP in high school. During my entire 15-plus years living in that house, there wasn't a single aircraft loud enough to hear from the base. One thing that might be unrelated, but it's definitely worth mentioning, is that I also live near a long-abandoned Air Force data center. It's in a restricted area deep in the middle of the forest preserve. The buildings have been entirely gutted, but remain standing, too hazardous to the environment to be torn down. There's also a ton of large World War II-era storage bunkers along the trail, all locked up tight. I used to hike up there a lot with friends to spray paint and do drugs or other hood rat shit, until we started hearing loud bangs at all hours throughout the woods, and it would reverberate across all the trees. One of the final straws for me was one afternoon when my friend and I were up there alone, and a small yellow helicopter-looking drone hovered over us, about 150, 200 feet in the air. It stayed locked on us even after we noticed it and ran inside one of the buildings to get away. After that, I noticed it started becoming more heavily guarded by intimidating-looking park rangers, literally down to the cartoonishly large white vans and tinted sunglasses. But I got the sensation that it was being guarded by something else, long before the drone and rangers and any of that. I always felt like I was being watched up there. Something completely took over the sky during my graduation party, and either everyone is denying it or no one remembers. It was a sunny evening in 2012, probably late June. I had just graduated high school after a turbulent 4 years, and my parents let me throw a little get-together in the backyard with friends and family to celebrate. In total, including myself and immediate family, probably 15 to 20 people tops. My dad had just finished grilling all the food and everybody had moved inside to a small screened-in porch area to eat, just in case it started getting buggy. Clear shay, here's where it gets weird part. Everyone was just sitting around eating and talking and in good spirits. Suddenly the sky gets very, very overcast. I live in an area where sudden storms aren't really a thing, and it didn't feel humid, so it didn't seem like a rainstorm of any kind. It was as though someone switched the sky to a flat gray when it had been cloudless and sunny moments before. As soon as I noticed how gray the sky had suddenly become, a horrendously loud noise rang out across the sky. It sounded like a passenger jet engine was landing in our backyard. A hush fell across the entire group, and everyone looked nervously at each other. No one said a word, even my dad, a 6-foot-something Norwegian raised by the Air Force vets, looked seriously, genuinely rattled, a look I'd never seen on him before and never have since. The even stranger part, it passed as quickly as it came, and no one spoke about it once the clouds lifted. It was as though time had frozen during that moment, and then everybody went back to normal, sort of. The rest of the night just felt strangely off. Everyone acted kind of robotic, like actors in a play or NPC characters. The air felt tense. No one I've spoken to remembers it, Not my parents, my friends, my family members that were there. Even my sister, who remembers what she was wearing the first day of kindergarten, didn't even remember. Even weirder is that I forgot about it until just now. I only remembered now that my parents are selling the house. I'm sitting alone in an empty house in that exact spot, and the memory just came flooding right back. I remember rushing to the window with my friends to try to get a look, but I straight up don't even remember if I saw anything or not, which freaks me out that my own memory is so spotty.